things over to Jason to get us started.
Okay, thank you, Petra. Welcome to the meeting. Appreciate you all being on. I hope all is well and you are all staying healthy and safe. As Petra mentioned, my name is Jason Skidmore. I'm one of the partners here at Vernovis. Also joining me this morning, and I'll hand him the mic in a little bit, is Michael Phillips. Michael is the principal of Weldon Phillips International. Michael's also been a CFO advisor with our Vernovis practice and recently leading our stimulus team that we've put together that's helping us put this call together today. For those of you who may not be familiar with Vernovis, we are a staffing and solutions provider focused in the areas of technology, cybersecurity, and accounting and finance. Through our model, we're able to both help companies staff up their existing teams with talent to help complete critical projects, or we can bring in our solutions teams to deliver the outcomes they're pursuing using our team of experienced experts. The solutions practice at Vernovis, we have core capabilities in the areas of CFO advisory services, business continuity, network and cloud architecture, and cybersecurity as well. So again, welcome to the webinar. Today we'll be focusing on the CARES Act, and specifically we're going to drill into the Paycheck Protection Program. I'm going to begin by giving us a very high-level, quick overview of this program, and then I'm going to invite Michael into the conversation so that we can all gain some more frontline perspective. Michael's team has been working with several companies through the analysis, application, and tracking process of the Paycheck Protection Program. So let's just start with a quick overview of the CARES Act. The CARES Act, as most of you know, is that $2 trillion stimulus package that Congress passed a short time ago. Its primary design, it hits a lot of areas, but this is the package that is looking to put checks into the hands of American families. There's a strong small business loan component to it. There are big loans or bailouts, as they're often referred to, for certain affected industries like the airlines. And it also includes grants to the healthcare industry. Those are just some of the bigger parts of that stimulus package, but there's much, much more. Drilling down to programs for small businesses, and keep in mind, and I'll go through this again in a moment, by definition of this program, small businesses are 500 employees or less than 500 employees, I should say. So there are really three kind of primary things there. There's the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, the Small Business Debt Relief Program, and of course the Paycheck Protection Program. I'm sure we'll get into all three of these just a little bit, but our primary focus today and the most robust of these is the Paycheck Protection Program. So what is the intent of the Paycheck Protection Program? So the primary intent of this concept is, number one, it's going to allow businesses to support their ongoing operations during a time of rapid declining revenues. So there's acknowledgement that we're not going to be sort of quote unquote back to work as normal for at least a couple of months. This program is designed to help small businesses keep operations rolling. Essentially, its primary piece is the retention of employees. This program was designed to help businesses retain their employees over this period of time, which would minimize the number of Americans that are reaching out for unemployment insurance and allow these businesses to keep the people that will be there. They're trained up, they're ready to go as soon as things get back online. And then finally, it does provide for rent and utility payments as well. So how does a company qualify? How does a business qualify for this? Well, it falls into one of a few categories. As I mentioned earlier, if you have fewer than 500 employees, you can qualify for this program. If you are an individual sole proprietor, it works. If you are an individual independent contractor or just generally deemed self-employed, you can apply for this program. And the other caveat to it is that you have not already received a duplicative loan. So if you've received some other type of loan that is tied specifically to disaster relief, or something along those lines, there are some guidelines that would state you either are not eligible for this or your eligibility changes. The amount of money that you can get that is forgivable changes. So let's talk a little bit about how this works. So what everyone is encouraged to do first and foremost is work with your existing bank. We're finding that some banks aren't even accepting applications from organizations that aren't already clients of theirs. Others are more open to it. But it's first and foremost stated, if your existing bank is an SBA lender, please work with them. If not, you need to find a bank very quickly that is an SBA approved lender. The way it works is that companies are encouraged to calculate 2.5 times their average monthly payroll. That is the loan amount you can receive. The loan amount that you're eligible for is 2.5 times monthly payroll. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And the design of the program is that the loan can be turned into a grant. In other words, if you use the money appropriately, the portions of the loan that you use to cover those certain items is completely forgivable. You pay no interest, you owe nobody anything. So what's included in the loan? How would you calculate it? So starting off, the biggest bucket is obviously salary, wages, commissions, tips. So anything that's deemed compensation in that category, salary, wages, commissions, tips to those employees. Any payments your business has made for vacation or medical leave is included in this. Also, any company paid group healthcare premiums or retirement benefits. So the portion that the company is paying of group healthcare is included in the calculation. And if you have a retirement benefit like a 401k match, the match portion is included as part of that calculation. Company paid state and local taxes are also included in this. So for most businesses, the calculation period that you will use will be the average of your last 12 months. So you take your last 12 months of those categories above and calculate an average monthly amount. And then that's what gets multiplied by 2.5 to determine your loan value. If you are a seasonal employer, then you would actually use the period of February 15th to June 30th of last year, 2019. It's taking into consideration that some employers have seasonality. Your payroll may be ramping up during this period of time, and you may need more money than your 12-month average. So seasonal employers can use that time period. And then of course, if you're a new business and you weren't in business last year, then the guidelines state that you can use January and February of 2020 to determine your loan value. What is excluded? What can you not include? I think the first and biggest thing to make sure everyone is aware of is any compensation above $100,000 is not included. Just to drill down on that a little further, what that means, if you have an employee who makes $120,000 a year, you are only able to count $100,000 of their salary into that calculation. Payroll taxes and income taxes are also excluded. Employees who reside outside of the US. Maybe you have a worker who's on your staff, but they live in another country, or that's where their primary residence is. Those people are not included in that calculation. And then lastly, if anyone has received money to pay sick leave wages that fall under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, those are also excluded from the loan calculation. So how does it work and how much of the loan will be forgiven? So once you've established your total loan value that you're eligible for and you've applied for the money, once you receive the money, it is expected that you will use that money over the 8-week period after you receive the loan. So you get to, once you receive the money and it's in your account, the clock starts ticking. You have 8 weeks to use that money. That money is then used to pay payroll based on the same definition that it was used in the loan calculation. All those same categories apply. You can use it to pay payroll, rent, and utilities. that becomes essentially the forgivable portion of the loan. So just to take some really round numbers, if you were to obtain $1 million and over the 8 weeks you used 750,000 of it in payroll, rent, and utilities, that portion of the money that you use is completely forgiven. Now, we'll talk in a minute about what you have to do to prove that, but that portion of the loan is completely forgiven. The remaining portion of the loan, if you choose to keep it, is a 2-year loan. It's a 2-year term at 1%. A 2-year term at 1%. So again, I'll make it very clear. You don't have to keep that money. You can give it back. You can say, I don't need it. And there's no penalties, there's no fees for doing that. But if you do keep that extra money, it converts into a loan at that point in time. So what to consider, some things to think through as you get into this process. Number one, you have to very carefully calculate the loan value to maximize the amount you're going to get. This is an opportunity to be very precise. Having been through this ourselves, we can tell you there are several documents that will be required by your bank. Every bank is looking at it a little bit differently, but generally you have to provide payroll reports, 940, 941 forms, proof of your rent and other things. So there's a lot of documents that are required during this loan application process. I think the other thing that should be noted as we begin to dig into this quite a bit, it's important to perform a really careful analysis and forecast of your business. There are some rare situations where this may not make as much sense for certain businesses. They may have a situation where revenue has declined so rapidly that there's more cost savings and some other decisions they could make versus actually getting this money. So you have to really do a careful analysis. If you do take on the money, and if you've let people go prior to receiving it, you're going to have to strongly consider bringing back those released employees. That is that is the intent of the money. That is why the act was put in place. And frankly, it's going to maximize that loan forgiveness. So you have to be in a situation where you're going to consider bringing back people that you've released that would still benefit the business. Tracking of the funds and the reporting is also going to be required to maximize that loan forgiveness. And Michael's, I'm sure, going to address that quite a bit as I invite him in. And then you got to really consider who's going to drive the process. I can tell you personally, it is very time consuming. There's a lot of communication that needs to take place both within your organization and with your banker because nothing's perfect and this isn't seamless, as I'm sure you've been hearing about on the news. It's gonna chew up some time. So you really got to think about who's going to drive that process and who's going to be best able to maximize what you get out of that. So at this point, I want to invite Michael into the conversation. So, Michael is, he's a dangerous guy. He's a CFO with a legal background. So we run a lot of things by Michael whenever it involves numbers and language in particular. But Michael has quickly began to spearhead a stimulus solutions team that we've put together that helps companies do, as you can see, a lot of the things that I just mentioned that are going to be important. So for us, this is an opportunity to share some insight from the front lines. As I mentioned earlier, Michael and his team are out working with several companies right now, navigating this process. So Michael, if you're there, I'll invite you in and throw a few questions at you, and then we'll start taking some questions from the audience as well.
Yes, Jason, and I just want to say good morning to everyone, and trust that you and your families are doing well. So, yeah, Jason, fire away.
Awesome. Well, thanks for doing this, Mike. I really appreciate it. So I want to get right into the stuff that I think everybody's hearing about and talking about right now. So the first question is, why are the banks in the SBA having so much trouble with the Paycheck Protection Program? What's going on? What are you seeing?
Well, there's a lot of, I would call it just general confusion There's hidden complexity baked in here that I think a lot of folks don't see. And you just look at the banks, what they're going through right now. They're swamped with reworking loans, especially, commercial loans. They received late instructions from the Treasury. I mean, it was about this time last week that they received final instructions. And then the SBA, who's really over this, if you stop and think, they process on average 60,000 loans a year for about $30 billion. The Paycheck Protection Program processed that much in 2 days. And if we go to the next slide, I think this characterizes how they feel. They're drinking from a fire hose. And so you have a very difficult situation that the federal government is trying to manage. On top of that, the banks are in a position where they're trying to play catch up. And quite frankly, there's really only been a few banks, and they're typically either the really large with the huge back office that can do this type of work, or they're the smaller community banks. The ones in between, some are doing okay, some are really struggling.
Absolutely. So thanks. So my next question, as we just dive a little deeper, how complex is this process? I mean, you're involved in a lot of these right now. I know what I've seen, the little bit I've seen, but you've seen several more. So your perspective's much broader. How complex is this process really?
Well, I think it's fairly deceiving. The complexity is really expected to be on the loan forgiveness step, which is the tail end of the process. And despite a relatively simple application process, there are key decisions that need to be made. And you alluded to this earlier. Analysis needs to be done as far as what makes sense for the business. But there's key steps that are going to have a definite impact on the level of loan forgiveness. And, keep in mind that the loan forgiveness covers an 8-week period. Well, 8 weeks is not 2 months. And, if you have biweekly payroll, it is possible when you do the math that you would only have 3 payrolls that are covered. In order to maximize loan forgiveness, the timing of all this is very important. Arguably, if you could time it perfectly with a biweekly payroll, you could potentially get 5 payrolls run through. And certainly you don't want to have any less than 4. So the loan origination date is really important. And then there's other factors as far as the ratio, the time period to use for calculating the number of employees that are on the denominator compared to what you're paying during the 8-week period. That plays an important role. And then other key decisions, we had a message last night from someone asking, do they need to hire all these people back? And, quite frankly, you have to make what is the best business decision. We're never advising anyone to, let the tail wag the dog. But in most cases, what we're seeing is the paycheck protection loans fall into the no-brainer category. And obviously because of the forgiveness piece. The other thing about the forgiveness piece, it's not considered income. So it makes it doubly appealing.
Right. Absolutely. Okay, good. So I fielded many questions over the last couple of days as we set this up and people started to respond. So I'll start by launching into a few of those, and I would encourage anyone who's listening right now, please continue to, we've already got a few different questions in the queue. So we'll get to those momentarily, but regarding the payroll calculation itself, Michael, one of the questions I was asked, is it based on gross or net payroll?
Yeah, it would end up being gross, but I prefer to use the language that they're using. It's total payroll cost plus additional taxes that the employer pays, not anything that's withheld from the employee. And so those total payroll costs obviously include insurance, sick benefits. It's a fairly broad definition that they have. The thing that we've made decisions on or advised our clients to make decisions on is that normally in these type of scenarios where if you can make an argument, my recommendation would be put everything in there you can think of. But because there's only a limited amount of money, $349 billion, and according to what we're hearing, Congress is promising to add another $250 billion. But because it's so popular and so many applications are being received, it's expected to run out. So it's important to get in the queue and then have the loan go through the underwriting process, get to the SBA, so it ends up being processed there, and then ultimately get a SBA number filled in. And so in order to do that, we've actually advised some clients to back off on throwing everything but the kitchen sink in and take a slightly more conservative approach, follow the letter of what the instructions are. Don't be overly aggressive because it may get your application pulled and you may have to go back to the front of the line. And so, a good example is, people would ask contractors. Now, normally the advice in the interim final rule from the SBA said that contractors should just file their own application. How about 1099? I'll call them employees. The rulings or the thought is a bit mixed. Again, with our clients, we've advised them not to go for that, just simply to make sure you get what you're really trying to get, and that's the overwhelming majority of your payroll covered. Hope that's a long answer, Jason, but I hope that made sense to some folks.
Yep, absolutely. Well, it's a good segue. I'll ask one more, and then I'm going to pivot into some of the questions that we're getting. Somebody asked me yesterday, I'll actually just read it. They said, I've submitted my application, but my banker does not seem to have much clarity on when I will get approved. Are you seeing this with all the banks you're working with?
Fortunately, if it were a batting average, we're doing great. We're like 500. If it were a free throw shooting percentage, we're not so good. Yes, I am seeing this. The concern is, and you need to, stay connected with your bank and monitor this. But we need the banks to move quicker on it. Some of the banks, I've received an email this morning, they're doing a lot of this work manually, which means it'll be slow. But if you have a big account with them, or if you have whatever relationship, you really want to tap into that. I mean, all of us that have experience working with banks, there's an element of science to it. They look at the numbers, but there's also an art to it. And you want to use that experience to try to move things along as much as possible. And I guess the other thing too is make the application as easy as possible for the bank to approve. And like I was commenting earlier, balance being aggressive with being practical as far as what you're putting in here. Make sure you can defend it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just add to that briefly based on the experience I've had with this. Banker relationship, I think, is critical right now. I was part of one of these where, to Michael's point, the application was actually just missing a little bit of info. It was like email address. But because we had a great relationship with our banker, he got it pulled and put right back in very quickly, so we didn't miss a beat on anything. So I think that relationship is key as you get into that. So I'm going to pivot now. Petra, I know we've got a lot of questions coming in. Do you want to start firing some of those over to Michael?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first question we received is it your opinion that a multinational company with affiliates totaling over 1,500 employees, but yet with only 57 employees in the U.S. would qualify?
It's a good question. We've had that one come up. If it's a foreign-owned company, it's going to be very difficult. I don't see how it happens. If this is the corporate headquarters, you may have a decent shot. You know, some of these I think are worth filling out the application. And, you know, again, not being overly aggressive, but being practical, fill out the application, and the bank is really going to be the first filter. And if they have any objections to it, you'll find out pretty quickly. But if it is foreign owned, it won't get liftoff.
Okay. Next question is, can you explain one more time the rent and utilities factor? People are wondering, you know, what qualifies as a utility. I've seen some other questions, you know, do things like your internet bill qualify, things like that?
Yeah, I had a couple of those come in yesterday, and you know, I think on the loan application where you're putting in payroll, I think you have to be pragmatic. As you get to the loan forgiveness piece, I think that's probably an opportunity. It'll be each company's own judgment to be more aggressive, because I don't think you get turned down by putting the internet bill included in with utilities. It may be rejected, I don't know, because there's actually no clarity on this. I mean, one of the things that I really didn't talk about that much is there's just tremendous confusion here. And, you know, you've got parties that are trying to process things that aren't 100% sure how to do it. And I'm actually impressed with how quickly banks have, you know, started moving on this. You know, considering they're like that, you know, young girl drinking from the fire hose. So, yeah, I think we can be more aggressive on the back end of this as far as what's put in and what we're asking for. But by the time we get to that, there'll probably be more guidance on it. I would be surprised if we can be incredibly aggressive with utilities. I think it'll probably follow a pretty standard definition. But again, that's speculation at this point.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And just to lob onto that real quick and just reiterate for clarity, because it does get confusing as we bounce back and forth between applying for the loan and loan forgiveness. Applying for the loan is going to be based on those payroll numbers. To Michael's point, making a decision about forgiveness, once you've got the money, you can try to get in as much quote unquote utility as possible and see how it flies. So I think that's a really great point that you made in the middle of all that.
Jason, you should answer the questions. I like that answer. It was better than mine.
I don't know about that. I think I get confused more easily than you do. So I can speak from that perspective.
All right,
Okay.
Fire away.
Okay, we're going to circle back. I know you touched kind of a bit on 1099 and contractors, but if you could elaborate, how does this impact independent contractors, sole proprietors, and 1099? They wouldn't have some of the same documents you referenced earlier yet to qualify for the program. Also, many may not have existing business loan relationships with their banks.
Yes, because many banks put as a priority, do you have a loan with us? And they move to the top of the list as far as who they're going to accept an application from. A sole proprietorship, for example, still can get this. Normally you have some kind of records, one would hope, whether it be checks, bank statements. You'd need to be able to summarize those records, do the calculation. Most of the applications are, for example, even with a large bank, and I'll use Bank of America, for a small $20,000, $30,000 qualifying loan, it's all done online. And then you will get paperwork where you have to send in additional information, but it's relatively straightforward and simple to do. You have to answer the questions, and the questions determine whether or not you qualify. but most banks would have that. If not, I think some of the community banks. And you have to, the other thing that's hidden behind all this, banks get 5% of the loan. That's the gain or the juice that they get. Now, it's not taken out of the loan, which is good news, but they get 5%. So this is a windfall for banks that can process these efficiently, and that's why there's an incredible level of interest by community banks in doing this.
Okay. As a follow-up, you mentioned that if you have a business loan, the banks will prioritize it. Is it any loan or only business loans?
Well, if it's sole proprietorship, it may be personal loan may be taken into account possibly, but for the most part, the focus is on, do you have a business loan? The second question is, if you don't, do you have an account with that bank and no other loans with any other bank for that business? Those get second priority. Third priority is probably an account and loans with a different bank.
Okay.
Again, you have to be proactive, and it's one of those things from what we're trying to do with Vernovis. If there's clients that are trying to navigate through this, I mean, obviously we can help them do that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Switching gears, if a company is a franchise, are royalties paid on the loan? Or can you include, your royalty within that loan?
I wouldn't think so. I mean, the whole concept is, well, if the royalty can be construed as part of the rental payment, possibly. At least in the literature, it does not appear that it could be at this stage. And keep in mind, we're working from, an interim final rule from the SBA. I mean, think of that, interim final rule. I mean, that sounds like, have you ever seen someone put a report together that says final draft? I mean, the title in and of itself is confusing. And so that's what we're working from, and we're expecting more guidance as we move forward, but I think that would probably be a difficult one to see make it through.
Okay. Can the borrower set the 8-week start date?
That's a really good question. There's nothing in the guidance that says that they can. However, some people in the SBA, managers at various banks, or one in Indiana in particular, said that he doesn't know, but he thought it would be possible. I look at it a little differently. When you're processing a loan document, you have to have signatures, you have an execution date, so on and so forth. The borrower actually can help dictate within a reasonable period of time, probably within a week, maybe 2 at the most, when that loan becomes effective, the origination date. And so, there's probably more control that can be exercised on the borrower's side, even if they can't necessarily pick the exact date, just by how they process the information and sign the documents.
Okay. And then we also have someone applied at a different bank that they only have a savings account with on Friday. Their personal bank, where they've done a lot of business, hadn't called them back, and they wanted to expedite the application. Since then, the bank has reached out to do the application. So after hearing you say a relationship is really important, should he go back to his bank or to the other bank that he tried to go to try to expedite?
If all things were equal, I'd go with the bank that I had the best relationship with. But if they're not equal, I'd go with who can process it the fastest.
And then, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. And Michael, let me lob another question onto that. Is there any risk in having 2 applications in the funnel at the same time?
Yeah, good question. I don't know the answer to that, but obviously won't be able to double up is the given answer. But if you have one that's making headway, I would withdraw the other. I wouldn't want, you know, the proverbial black mark on the company where they get pulled and maybe get in the slow line.
Okay. Another question, if a rehire starts May 1st, only 3 payrolls will occur within the 8 weeks. What is the best strategy for setting a start date, in parentheses, origination date?
Yeah, try to time the effective date of the loan. If we are given the ability to pick the start date, you want to pick it so it makes sense. Otherwise, you want to time the signing of it.
Okay. I think we've answered all incoming questions so far. Jason, do you have any other questions that you've experienced?
I do, just a couple, just a couple that I have that I've run across pretty frequently, Michael, and I'd love to get some of your insight on them out to everybody here. I referenced earlier that the Paycheck Protection Program was one of a few different forms of small business relief. Specifically, the other one that gets a lot of talk right now is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. Can companies get both? What's your insight and perspective on that?
Initially, the answer was no. And then when the interim final rule came out, it was yes. So a company can get both. The economic injury disaster loans are, I'll call them working capital loans, really. And they're up to $2 million with very long repayment schedules. Interest rate, depending on whether it's nonprofit or for-profit small business, is 2.75% for the nonprofits, 3.75% for the for-profit small businesses. So the key thing, if you get both, is make sure that you keep the loans separate. We're advising not only our clients but also our banks to tell people, open a new account if possible, and put the money in there, make it so it's squeaky clean, easy to show what you're spending the money on. And the Paycheck Protection loans, it's critical that those payments go towards things that will lead towards forgiveness. So the economic injury disaster loan, you do not want to make payroll from that. You want to use the Paycheck Protection loans. Same with rent. And so make sure you use them for the appropriate, keep them in the right box. Use them for the appropriate things that they're designed to be used for in order to make sure you maximize the level of forgiveness of the payroll protection loans.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate that. And then the other thing that I'll jump into that I think is relevant, obviously I've connected with a lot of folks that their businesses are too big. They're over 500 employees. And so the other thing that I'd like to just get your insight on a little bit for everybody is this other Main Street program that's being referenced for those businesses. What do we know about that so far?
Well, this is expected to be, have the Fed stand it up here any day with details to follow, but it is for what they call small to mid-sized businesses with 500 to 10,000 employees. And we do expect to hear something any day. We're eager to hear what it is. Most think it will not have anything as appealing as the Paycheck Protection loan. I mean, to have it debt forgiven and it not be considered income, that's probably the most positive incentive I've ever seen from the government. So, but it will be meaningful and I'm sure it will be useful. and I guarantee it will be big.
Okay, thanks for commenting on that. I think it's a question that's on everybody's minds right now. So, okay, well, I'm going to take this opportunity to wrap things up. I appreciate everyone.
Jason,
Yeah.
do you mind if I jump in? One last question we just had come in, sorry.
Of course, yeah.
All right, so if you've already applied for an EIDL, but haven't been approved or gotten the funds yet, and decide the PPP is a better plan, can you simply decline the EIDL?
Yes, I mean there's quite a few. There's the initial application. There's quite a few steps that you go through, and you know they're following the SBA 7A loan program as far as the process. So it's expected to take longer. If in doubt, I would try to seek, if you don't want to do it, I would go and try to have the application pulled. I'm not sure it's necessary, but that would be the safest way if you don't want it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions, Petra?
No, I think we're great. You can go ahead and wrap things up.
All right, good. Well, hey, we know that everybody may have additional questions as you process through this or want to reach out and learn a little bit more about potentially how we could help as well. I volunteered, my business partner, Brian, actually he volunteered to take the lead on this. We're just getting a ton of questions coming through, a bunch of information about this program. So if you do have anything else, feel free to email or call Brian directly, and he'll be able to best manage getting you to Michael or one of the other experts on our team to try to start digging through this a little bit and seeing how we can help you out. But so appreciative of everybody's time today. Certainly understand that you all have a lot on your plates right now and many, many big decisions that are taking place. So we thank you for taking the time to spend with us. We hope this was helpful and can give everybody some additional clarity and insight. And best of luck as we all navigate this situation together, and looking for the upside here really soon. Thank you all very much.
All the best. God bless.